Most Kenyans probably already have an interaction when it comes to digital lending services. Often you'll receive a call that goes, "John, you owe us that money, please send us that money." At the heart of today's debate is a debate around the same, and I will read the motion. The Kenyan government should impose stricter regulations on the mushrooming of digital lending services to protect youth from financial exploitation. I'll read the motion again. The Kenyan government should impose stricter regulations on the mushrooming of digital lending services to protect youth from financial exploitation. Proposing and opposing this motion is Moifos's Academy versus Maryhill Girls. All the best to both teams. Team proposition, first speaker, you have 3 minutes.
Now Kenyan MPs go after Safaricom, a digital loan provider that went to exploiting Kenyans, expecting a 1,000% rate of interest. Now panel, this is according to Tuko Africa. Now the Kenyan government should impose stricter regulations on the mushrooming of digital lending services to protect the Kenyan youth from financial exploitation. This is Frederick Ocheng, Moifos's Academy. Now the following motion will be dealing with SDG number 8, which is decent work and economic growth, SDG number 9, which is industry, innovation, and infrastructure, SDG number 12, which is responsible consumption and production. Now panel, we as side proposition feel that by the virtue of us imposing stricter regulations, we will be taking steps forward towards financial stability, financial credibility, and financial freedom nationwide. Now to further mechanize this motion, what is to impose? To impose is to introduce something new. What is strict? Strict is something that needs to be obeyed throughout. Now panel, by the virtue of us saying that we want stricter regulations, we do not mean unachievable expectations. We just mean effective expectations. Now panel, what is mushrooming? Mushrooming is the rapid growth and rise of something. What are these digital lending services that we are talking about? These are online platforms that provide credit to lenders that need them at the time of need. Now panel, what are examples of them? We have Tala, we have Zenka, we have M-Pesa, we have Fuliza, we have Mshwari, to name a few. What is financial exploitation? In the context of the motion, unfair methods of making money through business ethics. Now panels, I already stated that we do not deny the fact that there are already regulative measures being taken, but by the virtue of us introducing stricter regulations, we will be making movements and steps towards financial inclusion, towards financial literacy. Now panel, what is the problem in the motion? The problem in the motion is that there is financial illiteracy that catalyzes to financial exploitation that leads to economic crisis. Now what is the status quo of the Kenyan situation right now? Now, about 15 to 29 digital lending services are being created per year. This is according to the Digital Credit of Kenya. This shows us that there is mushrooming of digital lending services. Now panel, what is the status quo in the financial exploitation arena? Now panel, 23.2% of entire transactions being done by major digital lending services are being siphoned illegally. This is according to Tuko Kenya again. Now panel, we get to understand that there is a problem that needs a serious solution from the serious side of the house, side proposition. Now panel, what does financial exploitation looks like? Instance number 1, I need a loan of 2,000. I don't know that the interest rates are at 9.7, but I still take the loan. I am given 1,650, expected to pay 2,250 shillings due to the interest rates. Financial exploitation. I am fully aware of the interest rates. I cannot pay it back. I am desperate. I take the loan regardless of I don't know how I'm going to pay it back. Financial exploitation. Now panel, how are we going to solve this financial exploitation situation in Kenya? By having comprehensive licensing and vetting of these digital lending services, by having debt to income limits of these digital lending services, and cooling rate periods, whereas someone can reconsider their debt taken within a 48-hour period. Now, how are we going to tackle this financial literacy problem? Panel, we are going to tackle it by the virtue of us promoting financial literacy through public awareness campaigns, by taking mandatory steps to financial education regulations in Kenya, by workshops and seminars and government supports, because we are on side government. Now panel, if side opposition does not want Kenya to move forward, they are enemies of prosperity. And you know what we do to enemies of prosperity? We smite them out of the motion that clearly states the Kenyan government should impose stricter regulations of the mushrooming of digital lending services to protect the youth from financial exploitation. That was my time. Thank you.
Abraham Lincoln once said, "The best way to get a bad law is to enforce it strictly. Exactly what team proposition is trying to tell us. Celia and Jerry from the Maryhill Girls High School ready to oppose to the motion that states that the Kenyan government should impose stricter regulations on the mushrooming of digital lending services to protect the youth from financial exploitation. On to my first point. The proposition has come here and they have told us financial literacy, they are trying to impose these stricter regulations, but will they be effective? That is the question that we as team opposition have. First things first, I would like to, I beg to differ with the proposition's definition of terms, specifically on the term digital lending. So according to the opposition, digital lending is a process of providing credit through online platforms bypassing traditional intermediaries like banks. Also, the use of digital credit is higher among the youth and those of residing in urban areas, specifically with more education. I repeat, more education. Therefore, we as team opposers are trying to tell you, shouldn't your main burden be to promote the financial literacy in Kenya rather than imposing these stricter regulations? We pose that question to you. So, in an instance where the proposition team comes and tells us that by imposing these regulations, they will be helping us develop. We as the opposition are going to tell them there is no difference between what they are saying and the traditional banking. The traditional banking requires extensive paperwork. It requires you to have lengthy creditworthiness for you to have a loan. So therefore, team proposition, are you with us moving forward or are you moving backwards? We, the opposition, are trying to bring a change to this world. We need to know that Kenya is a third world country so that the United Nations #1 goal this year is to eradicate poverty. So team opposition, team proposition, are you the cause of this poverty or should you be trying to advocate to eradicate it? Team opposers posing this question to the opposers. So on to my first point. On to my first point. Our first point is to access of credit. Digital lending services provide access to credit for many Kenyan youth who may otherwise be excluded from the traditional banking systems. Stricter regulations could restrict access to credit, making it difficult for youth to meet their financial needs, such as education, healthcare, or entrepreneurial ventures. I repeat, the #1 goal of the United Nations is to eradicate poverty. How are we going to sponsor this youth if you impose those stricter regulations? Some of them might not be able to meet these regulations. So therefore, proposition, we say that the main burden today should be to promote financial literacy. I rest my case. Celia and Jerry, keeping it short and sweet.
A, B, C. If you still believe that the Kenyan government should not impose stricter regulations on the mushrooming of digital money lending services in the country, then you quite simply don't get the bigger picture. So please, let me be the luminary in land of darkness and shed some light upon you. Okay, Rosi Bani Misera, Moi Forces Academy. Now, one thing that you need to realize in the whole context of the motion is the identification of the problem. What is the identification of the problem in the motion in regard to status quo? Financial exploitation of the Kenyan youth during an ongoing economic crisis in the country. And what's the solution to the problem that we have at hand? Government intervention. Now, one challenge that I pose to my opposition is to give us a framework on how we can regulate the mushrooming of digital money lending services in the country without government intervention. Because they mentioned that one key and the key role of digital money lending services in the country is to provide access to credit. But now the question is, at what cost? Because there are several problems that are currently facing the digital money lending services. #1, high and rogue interest rates. In what sense? They lack interest rates. They lack a fixed amount of interest rates, whereby in contradiction to the CBK Act 1 of 2021 that states that there should be a fixed interest rates between the borrower and the lender of the money, and no other additional fees should be added without mutual consent. But this is something that we see that the digital money lending services are failing to do. An example of this digital money lending services, we have Branch, we have Tala, we have Credit Moja, whereby 40 digital money lending services in 2019 have been accused of this. According to
an article posted on the standardmedia.co.ke. Now, if we have lack of clarity between the interest rates between the borrower and the lender, then we have a problem at hand. Number two, we have privacy concerns of these digital money lending services. How? The privacy concerns of digital money lending services between the borrower and the lender comes in this context by stealing of third-party information of the borrower that can be used, number one, for identity fraud, number two, for theft, and number three, for other measures such as fraud. How is this manifested? Due to digital transactions that we have. Now, once the third-party information is stolen, then we can see several cyber crimes being committed. An example of this is in JKUAT 2019, whereby 14 JKUAT students stole 600 million Kenyan shillings. 600 million Kenyan shillings from Safaricom through third-party identity theft. I repeat now, all of this are disadvantages that digital money lending services have. And that is why we need government to step in to impose stricter regulations so as we can eliminate these disadvantages. Once we eliminate these disadvantages, then we are able to have better, to have more successful, to have more efficient credit given to you, the consumers, the Kenyan youth. And with that, I raise my case. Thank you.
Digital lending services, a step closer to achieving a developed country, but 4 steps backwards if we choose to impose stricter regulations. Now, I, as a second speaker, will first like to start with a few rebuttals. You see, Team Proposition came and clearly spoke about financial illiteracy, but we would like to tell you that digital lending services are 66% being used in urban areas whereby we have youth who are financially literate, meaning that it is ignorance for them not to read the terms and conditions of using these digital lending services. Because when they come and speak about high interest rates, we actually tell them that according to the Digital Lending Association of Kenya, it shows that these digital lending services do actually have a fixed interest rate of between 3% and 5%. Now, according to my knowledge, we as opposition posed a question: will these digital lending services be effective? They haven't been able to answer that. Now, on to my first point, whereby we talk about innovation and financial inclusion. Audience, judges, I call you to reason with me because this is a youth. You see, the traditional banking system whereby you have to take a loan from them, you require credit worthiness, you require collateral. But remember, this is a youth doesn't have any credit history, a youth who doesn't have any collateral. They need to take loans. So what do? They turn to these digital lending services. These digital lending services, which then have promoted financial inclusion, because according to the Kenya Bureau of Statistics, it shows that they have promoted financial inclusion up to 60%. If the youth are financially included, that means that we are fostering further financial literacy through what? The digital lending services. Now, if we tend to impose these strict regulations, we are making it difficult for the new HRs to serve these segments of what? Financial inclusion. If we tend to impose these stricter regulations, we are making the existing lenders become risk averse, limiting their willingness to experiment products. If they do not experiment products, there is no innovation. If there is no innovation, there is no technological growth. What is that? A step closer to achieving a developed country. But what? Exactly 4 steps backwards because you are choosing to impose stricter regulations. Now, when we come to market competition, you see, according to the Competition Authority of Kenya, it shows that an article they posted in February 21st, it shows that due to the competitions of these digital lending services, it has resulted to a 50% increase in the consumer satisfaction. Now, if we impose these stricter regulations, we are telling the smaller digital lending services that are actually there to decline in their growth. If they do not decline in their growth, there is no fair competition. No fair competition, there is no diverse access to credit. Again, what is that? A step closer to achieving a developed country, but 4 steps backwards because we are choosing to impose stricter regulations. Waithaka Valerie, and with that, I rest my case.
Quote unquote, experimental products, all in the name of innovation. What team opposition here is trying to feed us is half-baked goods. Are you all willing to take in half-baked goods? No. And on to my case. Let me just slowly break down each and every point which they have come to lie to us today. So they raised issues on financial literacy. The thing with financial literacy is that, number one, it cannot directly address the financial exploitation which the youth are currently undergoing. That's one. 2, financial literacy is hindered by complex financial products which majority of us here cannot understand. What team opposition does not understand is that financial literacy is a complex course which you have to study commerce, economics, etc., which are all university courses. So with the current lack of education currently in Kenya, currently faced by Kenyan citizens, how exactly is financial literacy supposed to come about? They raised issues on how this digital credit facilities, digital credit services are able to provide us with credit, hence leading to economic development. Well, we're not saying that it's a lie, but they're not telling the full truth. It's a half-truth. Well, they have failed to identify the problem being faced by the youth in the face of digital money lending services, which, as my team has emphasized on, is the interest rates which are being faced by the youth citizens. Quote unquote, Umba loan charges 10 to 15% monthly interest. MPL charges 15.88% per month on interest. Hustler Fund, a common initiative proposed by the current government, has 8% interest rate. What is the problem in digital lending funds, in digital lending services, is that we are taking loans which we cannot pay back. If you borrowed 1,000 shillings, you're not returning 1,500, but instead 2,500. With the crashing economy in Kenya, how exactly are you going to deal with these high interest rates? Again, you have failed to identify that these digital credit services have their own issues. They have also turned a blind eye to the issues on privacy concerns. A statistic by the Kenya Bureau of Statistics, Branch, Tala, Mokash, Credit Moja, among other 40 digital money lenders, are facing 299 complaints for allegedly breaching the privacy of Kenyans in terms of finance. What does this lead to? The leakage of third-party information used in fraud, identity theft, and more theft. Again, team opposition is failing to address the issue at hand. We as team proposition believe that we have taken the day because we have identified the problem. We have come with a valid solution. They have not even told you how their solution comes about. So what's the problem? The problem is the current economic crisis being faced by the country as a result of the financial exploitation of the goods. According to them, this youth are not being financially exploited. Apart from that, this youth are supposed to be the backbone for the economy. If they are being financially exploited, there is no way the economic development which they're talking about is going to come about. Apart from that, I would also like to emphasize on the framework which we have given, which we are going to impose limits on interest rates and fees to prevent predatory lending practices and over-indebtedness. We have also said that we are going to enforce stringent data protection measures in order to curb this problem, which is financial exploitation of the youth.
Money is what brings us happiness, but what happens when our cause for happiness becomes a weapon fathomed against us? This is Stephanie Kibati from the Maryhill Girls High School, here to strongly oppose the motion that states that the Kenyan government should impose stricter regulations on digital lending platforms in order to protect the youth from financial exploitation. Now, the speakers from Moi Forces Lanet have come and told us that the youth are financially illiterate, and now we cannot put the burden of financial illiteracy on these digital lending platforms, because these apps are very simple to use. All you do is go to the app, borrow a certain amount of money, and they tell you how much you borrow, and they tell you how much you borrow and how much you're giving back. Because if you simply read the terms and conditions that are very clear, then you should not be able to suffer from this. One thing they have also said is that the rates are very high, imposing 1,000% more rates, which is a lie. You see, the interest rates on the digital lending platforms are very similar to the ones given by the Central Bank of Kenya, whereby the Central Bank of Kenya imposes a 10% interest rates on money lending, whereby Entala gives back 7 to 15% interest rates on the same amount of money borrowed. Now you see, when the Central Bank of Kenya is giving back the same amount as the digital lending platforms, then this means that the youth are not being financially exploited. Then they say that these digital lending services, they prey on our personal data and they practice unethical practices. But let me state that in the 2021 Act of the Central Bank of Kenya, which was given by our first speaker, states that the digital lending services are not supposed to give out any of the users' information without their permission. And also in the 2022 Central Bank of Kenya Law Act, it states that they're not allowed to give out information on these people. But then these regulations are put in place, and yes, they are strict, and yes, they were given out, but did they really do anything? No, they are implying stricter regulations that are not really working for anyone. Now they've asked us, instead of these stricter regulations, what do we want to put in place? We want to put in place collaborative solutions, smart solutions such as financially educating the youth. They make it seem like financial education is such a rigid thing, whereby human beings are very smart individuals. You can come and tell them A, B, C, and they'll understand. You do not have to go to the university in order to understand financial literacy. You can simply be taught and you can understand, because human beings are smart people. They are not rigid. Now, the smart solutions that we plan on giving out are financial literacy programs, which I have mentioned, and also industry self-regulation, which is introducing a code of conduct that would emphasize on transparency for lending services and responsible debt collection tactics, which trusts borrowers and prevent them from consumer protection, innovation, and growth. Now you see, what I've come to make clear here is that negative effects on the digital lending services are not brought by the digital lending services themselves, but external forces. And therefore, we should not put the blame onto these digital lending services and impose these strict regulations on them. Instead, we should regulate the individuals who are borrowing money from these platforms. Thank you for your time.
So now, quote unquote, you do not need to emphasize on financial literacy. Now, panel, this is a type of mentality that will be taking the 4 steps back that they are propagating about. Because, panel, if you are not conversant with the giant secret charges that are hidden in the terms and conditions, if you are not conversant with the high interest rates hidden in the terms and conditions, how sure are you that you are paying the exact amount of money needed to be paid? Now, panel, when they are talking about stifling innovation from their side, all we said that we will be giving about comprehensive licensing and vetting of these digital lending services, so that we can assure that these so-called innovations are actually are actually good for consumption by the Kenyan youth. Because, panel, if they are not good for consumption, why do we even need them? Why should they be termed as innovations? Now, panel, they say that there will be decline in growth of digital lending services. Panel, I'd rather watch a decline in fraud than a rise of it. Because, panel, why do we need a lot of nonsense in our current status quo? Why do we need a lot of fraud in our current status quo when we can have a few but effective solutions? Now, panel, I gave you a framework that is clearly cutting across the financial illiteracy situation in Kenya, that is clearly cutting across the financial exploitation situation in Kenya, that will effectively deal with the economic crisis. Panel, they do not show us how their side will effectively deal with both ends, deal with the digital lending service itself, which is an act of the motion, and the Kenyan youth, which is another act of the motion. Do you know what we do to enemies of innovation? We smite them out of the motion. Thank you.
Back to the podium, the name doesn't change. We, the opposition team, have given you a clear framework of how our world should be. The proposing has told us that stricter regulations, this and that. But will they be adaptive to the Gen Z current world right now? I ask that question to the opposition. In conclusion, we, the opposition, are trying to say, while protecting the youth from financial exploitation is a valid concern, imposing stricter regulations may have unintended consequences that could outweigh the benefits, consequences that we have already highlighted. It is important to strike a balance between consumer protection and promoting financial inclusion, innovation, and personal responsibility and equitable financial ecosystem for all. The opposition team has delivered this motion exactly to where it has been. And therefore, we, the Maryhill girls, team opposition, we have weakened and therefore we have removed the force from the Moi Forces Academy, period.
A round of applause, please, for both teams on stage. Very interesting Gen Z perspectives when it comes to digital lending. We'll go straight to the judge's desk. Judge Clem.
That was a great debate. Both teams, you really understood the motion, and I like the way you were able to dissect it. I particularly enjoyed the third speakers because they understood their role. They were able to bring in some points and rebuttals. Abu Bakar, you're able to give your good points and flow in terms of rebutting what the other team was saying. Tiffany, the same for you. So I really enjoyed when the third speakers were talking. But all the same, all the 6 speakers were very good. So I'll go to Moi Forces Academy. Frederick Ochieng. I like the way you had a tactful way of your definitions. It adds to the style. You link the SDGs to the motion. You generally are a good communicator. That was very good of you. Bunny, you gave good examples, and I like the fact that you brought in a new angle on issues to do with data privacy, which is a big thing at this time.
One thing I found coming out is that we already have the regulations and they are strict, but we are looking for stricter regulations that didn't come out fully from some of the speakers. One thing I also didn't get very well was exactly how the exploitation is coming out. It was coming out, but the details, there is more than that. What happens when someone, for example, refuses to repay? That one was not coming out very well. But all the same, we got alternative ways on who to deal with. I think that was from Maryhill, and that was quite okay. All the best to the 2 teams. Thank you.